Welcome to the Rethink and Return podcast. I'm Nils Smith, joined by Jason Shepperd. Jason, thank you so much for leading this conversation. I'm so excited for this podcast. So, Jason, for people that don't know who you are and what you do, can you give a bit of context about your background and what you do?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Nils, and thanks for helping me figure out how to have a podcast, start it, lead it. So it's good to have you leading us through the beginning of this thing and starting it. Yeah, my name's Jason Shepperd. I'm the founder and lead pastor of Church Project and president of Church Project Network, which is a network of church projects. And also we have a thing called House Church Network. We're essentially an ecclesiology that's applied around churches all over the world.
And what you have built at Church Project has been so fascinating to me, and I think it's so biblical, and it's one of those things that sometimes you do things and you're like, this isn't rocket science, it's just biblical application applied, but you're seeing incredible fruits from the efforts, and that's what this podcast is all about. We're gonna really dig into so many of the uniquenesses of church projects and Church Project, and how that has developed into a network, and how that's really fleshed out in both the local church that you lead and the churches that you've helped to plant and to build out of Church Project. So, Jason, before we jump into that, let's talk about who you are personally. So, a little bit about maybe just you the person, your dad and a husband. What are just some things in your life that people should know of who is Jason Shepperd?
Yeah, I look forward to that. Thanks for asking it. And also, Nils, I'm really excited about this podcast to talk, all things, questions about pastoring and church. And when we rethink, we just want to have a base to return to. There's a lot of rethinking going on, but so the Rethink and Return is let's base it all in some truth. And really, I think that's been my journey. I grew up in a small town, medium-sized town in East Texas called Tyler, Texas, about an hour and a half east of Dallas. I've lost my accent, except when I go home and hang out with people for a couple of days, and then I sound like a proper East Texan again, quick. It's deep in my blood. I grew up there, but I live on the north side of Houston now, and I'm married to Brooke, and we have a family of 7 kids, and we have only one left in the house, a couple in college now, a couple have gotten out of college and graduated. So, yeah, life's pretty exciting here for me. It's a good season of life, and it's a good season at home and marriage. It's a good season with family and a good season in church. And we started Church Project in 2010, and I know we're going to talk all about that. But yeah, it's a little snapshot of my life.
Yeah, I love it. And so with that, what was your ministry journey prior to starting Church Project? When did you get into ministry, and what led to the beginnings of Church Project and planting this church?
Yeah, it was a struggle, and it was long. And, I like to tell people the last thing you're going to be doing is not the next thing you're going to be doing. I mean, there was so much in my life that happened to bring me, I guess, to the moment I'm in now. In fact, we had, 2 cohorts of house church pastors come to my house, sit around my fire pit, and we do that seasonally. So last night I had about 20 house church pastors from Church Project here in the Woodlands at my house, and 2 of our cohorts. And one of the guys asked me, what was the beginning? How did Church Project begin? And I said it began a long time before it began. And it was just God, putting things in my heart from the time I was 15 or 16 about the church, and things I loved about the church, and things I was very frustrated about the church. And when I would read the scripture, this dissonance between what I was experiencing. And then when I graduated college, I didn't think I'd be working in the church. I was pre-med in college. I thought I'd be doing something else in some of my grandparents' medical industry businesses, maybe do some medical mission stuff on the side. I never pictured myself like in a local church, but I cared deeply about it because I love Jesus. I love the scriptures. And so I started getting ideas about the church and what it could be, what it was, maybe what it should be, and how it could become that well before I ever thought about working in churches. But as a vocation, I guess. But then through college, I was serving in student ministries, working in churches, my home church, and then other churches. And then out of college, at the end of college is where I sort of sensed I'm going to be giving my life to the local church, in some form or fashion. This is what I'm going to dedicate all my life to. And then I got real serious about studying the church biblically, historically, and globally. and I started to develop an ecclesiology, all while working in churches. So I was doing all I could to teach the word and make disciples and strengthen churches that I was a part of. Yet I had some friction happening in my own soul about the church. And so it took a while for me to get to a place to where I said I'm ready to at least pursue what I now call an ecclesiology, a theology of the church. Let's apply this thing. I think there are a lot of philosophers of ecclesiology and very few practitioners of it. And so I wanted to be a practitioner. So we are what we call it applied ecclesiology. And that's sort of how Church Project, began.
I love it. I love it. And those are some big terms that we will dig into in the coming episodes. But I think it's also a big challenge of when you've done ministry for years and years, and you're like,
Yeah.
I read this and I think this, but I don't see it fleshed out anywhere. And so
Right.
I'm having to do church different than anything I've ever seen. And that's hard in any context. You even go outside of the ministry space of businesses that are, maybe going to do business in a different way that's never been done. It's much easier just to copy what's already being done than to step into a pathway to doing something unique and different. Now, in many ways, you weren't actually doing something that was never unique and different. You actually just went back to what was done in early days.
Yeah.
But what were those early days of Church Project? So as you developed this ecclesiology, what was that kind of journey into the first 3 to 5 years of the church?
Well, I think that, studying the church for me, I studied, biblically, historically, and globally, but also the contemporary church. And I felt like really every church was essentially built the same that I knew. I mean, some had contemporary music, or they had different, dress, they had different attire, they had different things in buildings, maybe a different style of things, but essentially they were built the same. Most churches, I believe, are still, and super centralized, primary pastors, and these things. So when I did a study scripturally, and I came up with what I now call an eDNA, an ecclesiological DNA, I saw some principles that I felt like they had to be embraced for all people in all places and all times. Now, they can, of course, be approached a little bit differently methodologically, but principally as a church, I see this DNA littered throughout the New Testament, explicitly and implicitly explained to us through the Word. And so there are some things that I knew the church has to practice, and we're not. And so I left a great church by most, modern metrics, and a future that was really secure in that place, and salaries and staff that, I worked with, and people who worked for me. And I left with no money, no people, no place, no name. I left very amicably and honorably, but I had to go pursue something. And I didn't want to take any people, any DNA transfer, because I wasn't taking something and adjusting it and building on it. I was rethinking, but by returning to these biblical principles that I saw, and I didn't want people from other places to come into it. I just needed a fresh canvas, not just of place, but even people. And so in 2010, I started Church Project. We had no money, we had no people, we had no place. By the time we sort of gathered a few months in, I went underground for a while and just prayed and thought and wrestled. And by the time we started, we had about 40 people. I think I knew 4 of them previously. And we just started fleshing this out with these principles that we held on to. So I put 40 people together, or 40 people we had together. I put them in 2 house churches. I found 2 people who I believed were going to be the house church pastors. I started pouring my lives into them. And that's just sort of how we started. And I have a phrase that has described us from the very beginning. We are a church of house churches. A lot of people in their rethinking, their rebelling leads them to completely remove, I think, some very crucial biblical elements of even common gatherings together. So some people rebel and they move to just a micro church or a house church, but I think it leaves them isolated and fairly impotent. And some people never rethink, and they don't rebel at all, and they just stay the same. And so they remain. And so for us, we're a hybrid of, I think a lot of things that were and have been beautiful in the modern church as we see it, but also embracing these timeless biblical principles. And so we've held on to both, and we did that. We're a church, one church, uh, common oversight by a group of elders, and common corporate Sunday gatherings, but we're very decentralized beyond that. And we've distributed pastoral leadership, and we have diverse discipleship communities we call house church. So I just started it with two people, man. I mean, we were raw, rugged, simple, ugly, actually, and ignorant. But these principles I wrote in a book that I wrote. I didn't know if we would have 40 people or 400 or 4,000, but all these things, these principles would remain the same forever, and they haven't changed.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk leadership a little bit, because I think there's a lot of leaders that maybe would go down a path of, man, I really see this opportunity, this vision,
Yeah.
but I can't leave the security of, and this happens even in
Yeah.
ministry. It's like nobody gets into ministry to make money, but sometimes you get into a season of ministry where you feel like you can't take risks. And so
Yeah.
what was that like, even having that conversation with Brooke of, I need to step out and, follow this leading, even, and abandon our security and our,
Yeah.
how did you navigate that calling and that, maybe just nudge
Yeah.
in your spirit?
I mean, bills are real, man,
Yes.
and I mean, I think it's ungodly, it seems. Scripture has told us, if we don't provide for our families. I mean,
Yeah.
we're called to do that. And so I get the tension. I mean, I wrestled with it, but I got to a place, Nils, I think you've gotten there in your life too. And most of the great leaders I know have gotten there, where, I mean, we're so convinced and convicted about something that, I mean, I told a group of people, I put together a board of advisors, most of whom would never be a part of Church Project. I didn't want them to be, but I needed counsel. I told them, I said, I'd rather work at Macaroni Grill by night and do this by day. And I mean, now I would choose better restaurants to work at, but
Yes.
like where I can make more money. But I'm like, whatever I got to do.
Yes.
I mean, I'm going to feed my family. That's my first responsibility. But I have to go after this. I mean, I can't not go after this. I mean, I was so disturbed in my soul. I couldn't with good conscience keep doing what I was doing anymore. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yes.
It would rob the people that I was pastoring and serving if I kept doing what I was doing, but I didn't fully believe in it. I mean, I think all of us have things that we wrestle with and have tension with over the years. But I mean, with integrity, I couldn't keep doing that anymore. I mean, I didn't believe in it enough anymore. And I was believing more in something else that I had more conviction about now. And so, I mean, Church Project, honestly, for me, was pretty much my last shot at it was my last shot at leading a church, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the Holy Spirit. I don't have the providence of God laid out for my life, but it felt like for me, I wasn't giving up on Jesus for sure, but I'm like, if Church Project doesn't work, then I think, I have some business opportunities that I've started or I've been a part of or attached to, or I'd step into. I'll go do that and figure out another way to serve the Lord, because leading a church other than the way I'm leading in a Church Project, it wasn't an option for me anymore.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a feeling there's some ministry leaders listening to this, and they're in that season.
Super scary.
And it is scary. And I think too, you had a mindset that, and you had a conviction. And I think sometimes we just have to, lean into that conviction, even though there's just some real consequences to some of those decisions. But there's also, I think, on the other side of that, there is provision. Sometimes it comes differently. Sometimes you've got to work at Macaroni Grill to make it work. And I think you've got to navigate that in a very real and tangible way, and accept all of that. But I think your commitment to this calling and even conviction tied to this is now you're 13 years on the other side of taking that giant leap and making that big risk. What have you seen over the last 13 years, and how has Church Project developed maybe beyond your expectations, maybe even what is different than what you initially envisioned that you're seeing today?
Yeah, that question's always hard for me to answer, and I get it a lot, and I think it's It's a good question. And I think people want to know the answer to that question when they're starting something, sort of to know the process, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I know if something's working? How am I going to get from here to where I want to go? And I mean, this is going to sound really, I don't know how it's going to sound, but like I didn't have much vision. I had values, but I didn't have much vision. Now, I mean, what sounds antithetical to that comment is I set Church Project up to structurally sustain what's happening now. I mean, from the way we set up as a nonprofit to our structure, like I had a structure that could sustain a lot of growth and impact. I just never had a vision that it was going to happen. I mean, I was so convicted and convinced about these principles being applied. And so for me, I really didn't have quantitative vision. I had qualitative vision. And for me, what I mean by that is I wasn't shooting for certain numbers. I wanted the health of things. I mean, qualitatively, is this thing healthy? Like, what does it look like in a healthy way to distribute pastoral leadership? What does it look like in a healthy way to decentralize from primary, place, and priest? What does it look like to live in diverse discipleship communities like the early church did, and globally they did, and historically, and most of our modern churches don't? And so, like, how do we do these things in a healthy way was really the thing that I cared about. So we've never thought, hey, we need to double by next year. That's never been a goal. We have not have quantitative goals. Now we have said, oh my gosh, 1,000 new people came here over the last 12 months, and we haven't multiplied enough house churches to adequately care for them. But we've never had goals of, growth. We've had health goals. And so, but I mean, if I did have a vision for what it would look like, it's beyond that,
Yes. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's gone beyond that.
It's fascinating to think that you articulate it so well. You started with values, and really pursued those core values. And I really want to just encourage people listening to this is, I think in many ways what this podcast is going to do, and if people are looking for a shortcut to get there, it's all in Jason's book, A Church of House Churches, that will give you a roadmap. But I think there's probably a lot of people that are dealing with the tension of ecclesiology, which we'll get into, and even their current ministry as they see it, and even the risk with doing things. And I think in many ways you've created a roadmap that others can now follow and learn from as you applied those values to the function of the church, and how you have organizationally navigated these convictions. What, Jason, is we're going to dig deep into Church Project and all of those aspects of what you've journeyed through over the last 13 years, and how it has developed as you've taken those values and turned them into kind of functional activity within the life of the church. But what are you dreaming about for the future of Church Project? So now that you're 13 years in, you've seen such incredible fruits in the Woodlands and beyond. You've now launched other churches and other regions. What are you excited about and dreaming about for the future of this movement?
Well, I'm excited to talk about that. Can I say one other thing? Please. On values and vision? I speak with church planters and pastors a whole lot, and I tell them, please, clarify your values and lead with those values, because your values are unchanging. Again, 40, 400, 4,000 people have these same values. Our values contributed to our structure, our strategy. People say our values. They don't say our vision. I think, we've had so much vision, but people get tired of waiting on vision. And a lot of times it just doesn't happen the way we paint the vision. But the values, they're evergreen. They never leave. And so if you have these values, one, they're attractive to people, they're clear, they're understandable, and they're completely sustainable. And so I think vision will come out of values. And so for us, that's been the case. We have had these values. We've had our biblical values of ecclesiology and some values that we practice as we live together in community. Those haven't changed. Because of that, our church just grew. Year one, it didn't grow much, from like 40 to 80, maybe 100 people. Year two, 100 to 200 people. And then nothing changed for us except rapid growth. 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600 people, that kind of stuff, and we didn't change anything. We actually held on to our values. The bigger you get and the faster you grow, the harder it is to hold on to your values and not add or take away from them. And so, part of my job has just been to hold the rope of who God's called us to be and not let that change. Of course, things feel a little bit different when instead of 80 people in a room, there's, a couple of thousand. That feels different to people, but actually we haven't really changed anything at all. And, we believe in this so much. We believe that this needs to be practiced in a lot of different places. These convictions that we have, I think every church should be practicing somehow. So, we're scaling what we're doing here and we're sharing it. And that's really our next stage. I think I have some stages of leadership I'm doing a little bit of writing on as I'm thinking about my own life and my own leadership. But I think, the stage that we're in now is we're scaling Church Project. There are a lot of people who are rethinking church, which I love.
Yes.
And when they rethink and return, biblically, they're finding these values. Most of the time, what we hear from people is, this has been in my heart for a very long time. I just didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to apply it. And we didn't come up with it. It's right here in the Word. So same Holy Spirit that we have as followers of Jesus, same scriptures. And I think when we read the Bible, we'll see these same things. I can't unsee them from the Word. And so we find a lot of people who have been rethinking church. And when they return to the scriptures to do that, rather than just the next model or next approach to build on from the last, when they rethink by returning to the scriptures, they align with this. So we're helping people figure out how to apply this ecclesiology in their context. We're planning. So when people ask us what's next, we just say more of the same. That's all. But more churches of house churches around the nation. We have a saying here: simplicity for the sake of generosity. We want more generosity. We have a theology of space that we share with people. How can you have space that we own, but we borrow it on Sunday, we share it with ministries throughout the week, and then we steward it, we rent it out, and we're mortgage neutral when all of our spaces are rented. Our building's used, 350 to 450 times a year by ministries in our city and by people who, rent it for things. And so we have a theology of space, we have simplicity for the sake of generosity, and we are a church of house churches. And so these are the things that we're sharing. We don't feel like we're experts by any means on really anything, but we are practitioners. And so a guy who leads a major global ministry said, your strength is that you are an ongoing practitioner. And so we're not a philosopher. We are practitioners. We have taken these biblical values. We've clarified them. We've continued to refine our language a little bit. But now we just share what we've learned and build community around that. So what's next? Just a lot more of the same.
That's awesome. I love, and I've been nudging you, Jason, to begin to share this story broader because it is so significant what is happening. And I think what you're also seeing as more people are applying this ecclesiology, and they're applying, I think, some of the same values that you leaned into 13 years ago. They are seeing similar fruits. They're seeing similar response, and I think similar response by disciples being made, and depth of disciples being developed, and pastors being empowered in these house churches. And it is such a beautiful thing as you have been through this process of rethinking and returning, and that's what we're going to flesh out in the coming episodes of this podcast. And so I can't wait to dig into these conversations, and I have a feeling the listeners heard some nuggets as you talked about sacred space, and as you even just talked about how you lean into generosity, and how as we develop out these things, what that will mean for our churches. And I want to encourage the pastors that if you're in a place of just that tension, that it doesn't mean you have to start all over and leave what you're doing. I think there's going to be some lessons in what you hear that you can begin to apply in your ministry context. And so this is such a valuable and important conversation as we collectively rethink and return. Jason, as we wrap up this episode, any kind of final thoughts you want to share with leaders around kind of these foundational principles and values that you've developed at Church Project?
Yeah, well, I'll say this, Nils. Thank you for your encouragement, because I've just had my head down, pastoring and leading a church and helping other people plant churches. And you have been, a champion in my corner to say, "Hey, let's share this more widely." But I mean, I don't even know how to get this podcast. I don't know how to hit record on this thing. I mean, I have no idea how to live in this world, or much less record it, how to share it with people. So, like, you're just so great at what you do. So thank you for pushing me into that, but also your heart for the church and your view into the church from what you do has been so encouraging to me. So this wouldn't happen without your help, and so I'm really grateful for that. And one of the things that also compelled me to be a part of this now, to start a podcast now, is I know the state of pastors around the nation, and it's not great. And I have a huge heart for pastors, because I think there are people who God called and he gifted, he equipped, but they were placed into a structure that's not a sustainable, healthy structure. And it puts so much pressure on the person that we can't carry that for very long in a healthy way. And we were never meant to. So my heart in this podcast as it grows is not only that we're going to talk about biblically ways to do church and generosity and buildings and things like that, but that pastors would be really encouraged. I mean, I'm a pastor and I want to be a pastor's pastor, sort of like a player's coach, and like, I care deeply about, I turned 50, December 11th, 2023, I'll be 50 years old. And so, I'm not the youngest guy in the room anymore. I'm not the oldest guy in the room. I mean, there are a lot of guys ahead of me. They're still in the fighting, and I want them to. We need them to. But also, there are guys 25 years younger than me who are doing this. And so I care deeply about, walking alongside people as a friend and a brother and a guy who's been doing it a while now. And I hope that this podcast will be great encouragement. I think it'll have insight into things we'll talk about, but also I hope it's a great encouragement to people. And I want pastors to be encouraged. I want you to stay in the game. I want you to keep doing what you're doing. God called you and gifted you. And I know you got into this thinking that you would. Statistically, you won't. But I think if we reframe and reapproach some things, and I can tell you it's possible to do that, you may be able to stay in this longer in a healthier way and see the fruit that you always dreamed of. So I think, Nils, that's my heart for this. And thank you for helping get it going.
Yeah, I'm so honored and I'm so excited because this is going to be such a valuable resource for so many church leaders. So those of you listening, I want to encourage you to do two things. One is go to our website, go to rethinkandreturn.com, get on our email list, get updates about new episodes coming out. We've got a lot more things I think that are coming that you're going to want to make sure you're on that email list. And the second thing is share this with a friend. That there's probably somebody that you've had similar conversations with, that you know what, I can just text this podcast to them and they can begin this journey with me, as well as I'm rethinking and returning a bit of how we do ministry together. So Jason, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you everyone for listening. We will talk to you again on the next episode.
Thanks, Nils. See everybody later.